I'm super excited. Dr. Ashby is here, as you can see, to talk about artificial intelligence. He completed his PhD from National University, formerly North Central University. His dissertation was titled Effectiveness of Machine Learning Algorithms on Predicting Course-Level Outcomes from Learning Management Intelligence. I can't even understand those words. Sorry. He also holds a Master's of Science in Computer Science from Georgia Tech, focusing on interactive intelligence. His research of machine learning in higher education falls within the umbrella of artificial intelligence. Earlier this year, Dr. Ashby joined Howard Payne University as the Dean of Online Education and Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Computer Information Systems. Dr. Ashby previously served at Hardin-Simmons University for 20 years, where he taught computer science and directed the online bachelor's degree in business administration. So hopefully he'll use words that I can understand, but let's give Dr. Ashby a warm welcome.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me if I stand right here? Okay. We'll try and see how this goes. I'm used to a classroom where it's not quite as deep and I just project, so I'm not used to being tethered to a microphone. Thank you, Sheila, for the introduction. To get started, let's talk about just an idea of what we're going to talk about today. What is AI? When we talk about artificial intelligence, it is a very buzzword right now in the marketing, and often I would argue that it's really just a substitute for technology when there's actually a difference. It's a whole different thing. What is generative AI and how does that integrate into society? So AI is a big umbrella, and if you actually look at the history of it, a lot of the theory, a lot of the actual ideas are about 70 years old. They actually, most of them generated out of World War II when we had code breaking, some of those algorithms of how we could do it. However, those didn't come to fruition until later when we actually had the hardware to actually pull it off. So a lot of the algorithms and a lot of the things you're actually seeing now have been philosophical or ideas for long periods of times. They've just gotten to the point where we can actually now implement them. Also, I'm going to go through the slides and then I'll have questions at the end. I know people have questions, but let me try and make it through the slides, okay? Quick poll. Just raise your hand. How many people are concerned about AI? How many people are excited about AI? How many people y'all are in between? It's where most people found. Pew Research did a survey for the past few years, and they're seeing actually more excited. The concern is actually going down. People are getting a little more actually on the edge. The tipping point, a lot of people will say, was November of 22, so 2 years ago. That's when OpenAI released ChatGPT into the wild, so to say. And that's where a lot of this actually started off. So another question for you. In healthcare, how many of y'all want AI in healthcare? How many say yes? How many say no? Okay. A lot of the research would show from Pew is a lot of people are actually uncomfortable with AI in healthcare. However, they think that most people are uncertain if it would lead to better patient outcomes. They're not sure. Research has shown that actually the best product for doctors is AI assistance. One case that I read showed that an AI algorithm to be able to detect cancer from MRI imaging was about roughly upper 80% accuracy. The doctor was roughly about low to mid 80% accuracy. If you combine the two, it was in the upper 90s, right? And so this is an idea of AI is only as good as the history. What they realized was there were certain edge cases on the images that the computer was really good at that humans were bad at. And there were other cases where humans were good at and the machine was bad at. And so this is where AI, I have a feeling, just like with any other technology, will get integrated into society. Spoke with a physician assistant at Hendrick ER earlier this year, and he said before he even reads the EKG, the machine already tells him what kind of is expected. And he's validating more than actually always interpreting, especially if it comes up with certain abnormal rhythms. So why do people like me study AI? Because we're nerds and we just enjoy it, right? That's part of it. Not going to lie, I'm a nerd. Part of it, actually, many researchers would say that it's to lead to a better society. They actually will think that the output of the AI will outweigh the risk or the negative consequences. That's at least the hope. Whether it will or not, I think we're still decades from actually finding out. Another reason we study it is to understand the world around us, okay? Often, if you actually look at a lot of AI, we're just mimicking what we see. AI really isn't new per se. A lot of times we actually just, hey, what concept have we seen before? And we implement it. And this is a common practice among a lot of technology. If you remember probably 20 years ago, the good old Motorola Razr flip phone, I don't know if y'all remember those. Most of that design came from Star Trek. Sci-fi typically leads to a lot of the designs. Why? I will tell you, as a computer science, I am not very creative. So we just come up with whatever we see and just go, yeah, that works, right? So the other reason we study is a better understanding of cognition. How do we understand the thought process? Often this is in humans, but it's not always. Dr. Starner out of Georgia Tech is doing research with dolphins where he actually is taking the sound waves from dolphins, running them through AI to actually translate the clicks and whistles to understand. And they've deciphered that dolphins give each other names. They label objects. They also are very fun and playful creatures who realized what he was doing and started flooding his research with random noise to mess with him. And so cognition isn't always just about the human, though that's where a lot of it is. One of my favorite classes was actually a knowledge-based AI class in which we had to actually build an AI to take an intelligence test. Our grade was based on how intelligent our agent was, which was great, but a part of the class was, what if I could build an AI algorithm that doesn't score the highest on the intelligence test, but it scores the exact same by answering the exact same answers as a 14-year-old male autistic student. If I understand that and I understand my code, what does that tell me about that person's thought process? If I can predict what wrong answers and why he's picking or she is picking that wrong answer, what does it tell me about the person? How can I then understand them better to help them? Which goes back to that betterment of society. So AI is not all about the perfect system. That's where most people go. There are huge areas of research in which AI is actually trying to just better understand why we make the mistakes we make, okay? At the same time, if it comes down to a self-driving car, I hope it does better than the humans. Otherwise, it's kind of not useful, all right? So when we talk about AI, what do we really mean? One of the first things I usually tell people is, I'm not a roboticist. I don't handle the robotics. AI is a software typically. The hardware where machines move, that's in robotics. I'm not that big into that. That's a lot of physics that I don't want to deal with, okay? So AI is about the code and how it's implemented. Machine learning is what is actually hot right now. This is where we have AI that actually is attempting to learn from data sets. So mass amounts of data, which wasn't possible even 15 years ago, because we didn't have the hardware to actually hold the amounts of data and the volumes of data that we have now. Makes that, we didn't have the data generation that we have now with mobile phones. Mobile technology actually accelerated a lot of this because it created vast amounts of data sets for us to actually use. Within machine learning, there's three main categories, the first being supervised machine learning. This is not human-involved machine learning. Supervised machine learning says, I label it, and the machine's going to figure out if it can predict whether it is or not. For example, I have a bunch of images. I have a set that are cats and a set that are dogs. I give it an image. Can it properly label if it's a cat or a dog? Unsupervised is, I don't give it labels of cats and dogs. I just give it all the pictures, and I say group them by whatever factors you can. hopefully it can distinguish which one's a cat and which one's a dog. It might come back and just say, hey, all these pictures are dark, all these pictures are light, or all these pictures have orange, or all these pictures have fill in the blank. But these are kind of algorithms that we call unsupervised machine learning. The last is what is called reinforcement learning. This one's newer, really has only been around for about 8 years. A lot of this was a lot of theory until, if you remember AlphaGo, if anybody is a big board game person, this was a big one. Chess has always been one of those games the AI has been tried to battle. Go was actually a more complex game. And so for them to be able to build an AI to play it and beat a grandmaster at that was a lot bigger of an accomplishment. And it fell within reinforcement learning, which is really saying, here are the rules, good luck, okay? And this is honestly how we often learn more as humans, right? I tried something, it didn't work. I don't necessarily get told the answer, I just know it didn't work. So I try something else and see if that works. I get basically positive or negative feedback typically at the end. You play a game of tic-tac-toe. You don't know if the first move was good or not until you know if you won or lost. If you won, maybe the fact that first move was a good move, maybe it wasn't. And those are models called reinforcement learning. Under reinforcement in any of these, we have what is called deep learning. This was about 10 years old. This one is where we actually just add a whole lot of what we call layers to our thought process. If you think about like a decision tree, you're at a stoplight, do I go or do I not? Is the light red? No, I don't go. Yes, it's now green. Okay, do I go? Well, I wait for, and these are thought process. The layers more complex you get is called deep learning. With better technology, we've been able to handle that, which led to what are called large language models. This is where you get your ChatGPT, Claude from Anthropic, Gemini, some of those, I'll list some more out in a minute. This is where we actually build. Now the language terminology here is a little misleading because everybody thinks English. That's what we mostly use. Foreign languages are allowed. Other languages like mathematics, chemistry, and other things are allowed in here too. We can build equations and chemical formulas and things like that using these models as well. Even to the point we can build music and images, okay? For example, actually let's go this way. Music's being created. Spotify, if you're into that, has a whole genre called AI-generated music now. Ironically enough, the AI is listening to the AI-generated music, labeling it at what is good and what is not, and then creating more based on what it thinks is good, and it's in its own little cycle over to the side with no human actually listening to it. It creates arts in generation, so I can tell it to do something and it gives me an image. This is where you see those pictures pop up and somebody's got 6 fingers and 3 ears because it's still learning how to figure out how to make it actually good, and so we're working on that. Microsoft Copilot for Office. That assistant there, if you remember from the 90s, little clippy, it's a lot better now, okay? It's not just a little pop-up that goes there. This will help autocomplete things, spell check, double check things for you of, this is my favorite, send an email and I'm like, I'm gonna attach this file. I go to click send and it says, hey, you said you were gonna attach something. I don't see anything attached. Are you sure you wanna send this? No, I'm not sure. Let me go actually add that file. Those kind of things. GitHub, if you're into software development, can generate vast amounts of data code for you, marketing plans, and just business automations in general. One of the ones I put up there earlier is called Dolly. Dolly's one of those things where we can create images. So for example, I asked it over here, it's kind of hard to read. Hey, give me a picture of a roadrunner on a cactus in the West Texas sunset. And that's what it pops up. In case you're wondering, I said earlier I'm not creative. There's no way I could have created that. However, if I do web design, I often need images. Guess what I go to now, right? Another one, I asked it to depict a binary tree in computer science. Not so much. Though it's ones and zeros, and though it looks like a tree, that's not what we call a binary tree in computer science. Oops. There again, they're flawed, and I'll explain why more here in a second. AI is a generation of sequence of things, okay? And what I mean by that is large language models statistically join word after word. If I ask it, write me a paper on the Civil War, it says, when previously seen, the word that comes first is the. Next word probably based on this prompt is going to be civil. The next word based on this prompt is going to be war. And it just repeats that process really, really fast, a whole lot, to write that paper. That's really what generative AI is actually doing. It's not logically basing words on denotative and connotative meanings to build something out. It's just looking at a whole lot of data saying, often this word in this context follows this word. Spell check doesn't, the old school spell check had a whole dictionary. It would go look, is that word in the dictionary? No, mark it. Now the grammar and some of the spelling says, hey, A doesn't come before this word in 95% of the cases, so let's flag it to make sure that's what they really wanted. That's what a lot of this is actually doing now. They're built on what are called neural networks. Neural networks is the kind of concept that try and replicate the human brain on how we think and process. And it's trained on what are called trillions of tokens. If you want to think of a token being a word, that's fine. The problem goes into when you're creating images, you have to now think of pixels. And it just does this really, really fast. Okay? Since it's guessing, just with good probability and statistics, we think it's right. However, there are two primary concerns with this, what are called hallucinations and drift. An hallucination is when it just makes something up and gives you a wrong answer. A drift is when it could feasibly be right, but it's actually a wrong answer. In my first case, and this is a little hard, I was finishing my dissertation when this all came out, so I asked it, hey, ChatGPT, can you give me an article based on student debt crisis and how that's impacted? It said, sure, I can do that. Here's the journal, here's the article, here's the title, here's the authors, here's the volume, here's an abstract. I'm like, hey, this is great. Let me go check it. So I go search, I found the journal, I found the volume, I found the issue. I couldn't find the title. So I went back and asked, and it's really hard to read, apologize for that, but the last one, ChatGPT says, I apologize for the confusion. Unfortunately, I made a mistake earlier, there's no such article. It had the self-realization after the fact that it just made something up, right? This is a hallucination when something doesn't exist. However, both of those authors do have articles on the topic. That journal does exist. It just put the tokens, those words, by each other because they were probabilistically the highest and best guess. I asked ChatGPT, can you multiply this big digit number, 724,929 times 37,103? It's math. We have calculators. Surely AI can do that. It can if it uses a calculator, but it doesn't. It uses guessing one token in front of the other. So it comes up with this nice big number. If you look at the bottom, it actually doesn't even put the same number twice. Why? Because it was predicting one in front of the other. It's not actually running this. And so a lot of this is learning what the tool does. This is ChatGPT. Had I switched over to Gemini by Google, it would have gotten it right because of how they built their model. Okay? LLMs have been adopted in a lot of companies. Like I just said, OpenAI, Claude, Anthropic, Google made Gemini. All of them are building them. People are including them. Now there's hit or miss because of intellectual property and things along those lines on whether companies will allow generative AI by their employees or not. They've used them for chatbots, summarizing audio, summarizing, you have a meeting like this, you record the whole thing, you give it to ChatGPT and say, hey, what are the main points? Give me the follow-ups. And you then ask yourself, why am I taking minutes again? Because it can do it for you, right? And so you have those kind of things. Ashby's over here taking minutes. Brainstorming, planning, getting ideas, thinking through this. Talking about chemistry, one of the ones I saw was somebody asking it a different algorithm, a different model. Can you generate herbicides for certain crops in certain climates? And it populated 10 different possibilities. Chemists to look over and go, that's not possible. We already did that one. We already did that one. That one's a good idea. Let's start from there, right? And so this is where we talk about brainstorming and going forward from there. We have seen impacts on work. 19% of workers have jobs that are responsibility probably can be done by AI. So this brings up the concern of, will AI replace jobs? And the answer is yes. Technology always replaces jobs. If you look at the history of America, when it first started, the largest labor force was in agriculture. Now that makes up a very, very small portion of our market. There's a good book called Humans Need Not Apply. It was written 10 years ago in 2014 by Jerry Kaplan. In it, he talks about how the Department of Labor actually sent a letter to the president stating technology is advancing too fast. We're worried about the American economy because we don't know if we will be able to adapt and learn fast enough and keep up with the technology. That president was LBJ. This is not a new problem. We just seem to start accelerating a little faster now. The AI assistant I was talking about, whenever we talk about software development, it can write code faster than a human can, more accurately than a human can. So they did a study where they gave half the team AI, the other half didn't. They had a 56% increase with the team that had AI. To put it into perspective, when we had the steam engine in the mid-1800s, that increased the production only 15%. Right? This is going to increase production a lot. How that works, how we educate our up-and-coming generation makes a big difference on how that's going to be there. While jobs will be displaced, I believe new jobs will be created. And it's a matter of learning those. The shifts and skills of the knowledge, make sure people understand what's needed. Ideas for AI in personal use. When you don't know something, go ask, right? I still remember when I was in elementary school having to learn how to use the card catalog. Y'all remember, sitting in the library, y'all remember that one, right? That's how we found books. By the time I got to middle and high school, the card catalogs were still there, but we got to use that computer and it would tell us where it was at. Now, card catalogs, I have not seen one in a library in I don't know how long, right? I was talking about AI with my colleagues at a university, and they said, I just don't think students should use AI. And so I looked at my colleague and I said, because you still use the card catalog to look up your research articles. And she just looked at me and said, I hate you, and kept going. So when you don't understand something, ask it. It will give it back to you. Part of this is what is called prompt engineering. On ChatGPT, when you ask it something, give it some more context. State who you are. I'm a computer scientist trying to learn about English. I'm horrible at it, so please explain what a gerund is as you would to a fifth grader. And it will change the verbiage. If you know more about it, tell them, I already know this part. What else do I need to learn? And then when it gives you something back and you don't understand it, you ask about it. It can be very conversational. This is one of the biggest reasons they made the ChatGPT the way it is they intentionally made it conversational. One of the things, we talked about the probability behind them. They don't always pick the best probability. They pick out of the top set often. And this is why you don't get the same response every time, because it also makes it more human-like. It helps pass what we call the Turing test to make things feel like it's a human on the other end. Brainstorming. If you're still employed and you get stuck on your job and you don't have any ideas, go ask. I tell my students this all the time. If you need to come up with something, it can't write your paper for you, but it can help you figure out how to get there, right? My students are like, no, it can write my paper for me. I'm like, okay, fine. Here's a follow-up exam about what you just wrote. You don't get to look at your paper. Guess what? Their grade goes down. When you're building something and you get stuck, maybe you're writing that paper and now it was a 5-page paper, or maybe you're writing a report and you need to make sure you have everything in the report. Go ask it, hey, can you tell me what this should be like? Hey, what other ideas do you have? And I tell them, Dr. Joyner at Georgia Tech, he writes it this way, and this is the way they wrote their cheating policy. Treat AI like you would any other rational being. Would you ask your study friend to help you study? Yes, you can ask it to do that. Can you ask your friend for help on a problem? Yes, you can do that. Can you ask your friend to write your paper? No, it can't do that. Can you ask it to edit it? That's where the gray area starts to get a little more, but I'm of the philosophy yes, because I'm a horrible writer, and so I like the help. Okay, polishing it up. Run it through and have it double check things, right? One of my favorite things is AI that does text to speech. Have it read it to me. I'm an auditory processor. I will hear the mistake before I will see it, right? And so I will have it do things like that. Also for soundboarding, when you're not sure about something, one of the apps that's out there is called social.ai. Basically, it's the idea of how the creator made it. He said it's like the Google results for ChatGPT. Right now, if you ask ChatGPT something, it's going to give you one response. In this case, social AI, you post something and it's set up like a social media platform, but nobody in this thing is real except you. Okay? And everybody's like, well, that's kind of odd. Until you're like, hey, how should I respond in this given situation? And it brings different personalities. And it says, hey, in this situation, I do this, I would do this, I would do this. And you go, oh, hey, bashful Susan, I like that response. What do you mean by that? And then you can start tracing that rabbit trail to figure out how would that personality, or you're not sure how somebody else is going to respond. Put your prompt out there to see what personality is going to respond different ways to get different ideas. And so it's basically, if you want to just feel good about yourself, just posting that and they'll all reply to you because they're just all AI, and so they have nothing else better to do. There's another one called Shell Game. It's a podcast. Note, I will give this disclaimer. There is language in it, so just be careful that they don't filter. The guy sets up AI with ChatGPT, text to voice, and hooks it to his phone, and then starts calling people with it. Not in the robocall that y'all all hate that comes to you. He actually robocalls the robocallers, and that's one whole episode. He then decides, what would it be like if I did, and he puts it through in each episode something different. Toward the later end, he actually takes it and has it talk to a therapist. He has it talk to itself to see, he built the whole thing on his life. Could he better understand himself? And he tried to find out, I think it was kind of, in the end, it was kind of comical in different parts. I don't know how effective it was, but it brought up a few points. One of the things that I realized in that is there's a whole market and genre of people using this AI and the voice AI to actually set up therapy so that people have somebody to talk to help. Because right now in America, there's I don't know if it's a crisis yet, but there's a lack of counselors and therapists for people to go to talk about mental health. And they're trying to see if this would be a solution, right? And so it creates that. At the same time, there's something about, and one of the things he says in there, once people realized it was an AI, he was intrigued by how freely they would speak that they normally wouldn't say to him, because they realized it really wasn't him, even though it was his voice. And so, with that, what can we do? Know what's going on, understand the differences between the models, the agents. Do what you're doing now. Ask. Just like with a car, different cars serve different purposes. AIs have different purposes. Find out what you're trying to do, what you're wanting to do with it, and then find the AI that works for that. AI is also not new, so look at history. It will help us predict the future. Basically, that's what AI is doing, is grabbing the data set of history, looking for the best answer, and giving it to you. And then keep learning. All right? The scary and fun part right now, questions. Hopefully I didn't lose you all. Yes?
Among visual artists specifically right now, there is this huge issue of, is it stolen art, is it not stolen art? And it is a deeply divided, either you think one thing or you think another thing. What is your feeling on that? How is that source, and is it stolen art?
If this now gets more into the legal aspects and law.
Never mind legally, just like applicably.
It is generation of bits one at a time. So if I ask ChatGPT to create something, it's randomly creating it. According to its license agreement, it tells me data ownership is now mine. What it based its model on and where it got that information, that's up for debate. The other thing with it, I forgot which podcast I was listening to, said OpenAI is now going and finding different partners and signing agreements with news agencies and different places to actually make sure they have license agreement to pull data from them. Artistry is the other aspect of that. I don't know if they're trying to pull from public domain, but what does that really entail? If I scrape somebody's website, Was it open? Was it not? That becomes more of an issue. There again, I'm not creative. That's about all I know on artistic side of things. And so it does create the problem of, from an ownership perspective, most of the AI agents and models will say you own it after it's created. Now, if it includes a copyrighted image or something along those lines, that I think it gets a little more tricky. So did I dance around the question long enough? Other questions? Yes.
So is there any regulation or plans for something in place to let someone know they're dealing with AI? Like you brought up online therapy, and there is platforms out there now, like there's an app for that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're assuming you're talking to a human.
It depends on the vendor. So a lot of places that I've seen, the vendors will often say this is AI. Part of it comes from a liability standpoint. So whenever the AI might hallucinate or drift, they can say, hey, it was AI. It's still possibly to make mistakes. So right now I'm seeing a lot of people more out of self-coverage and liability on their own side, stating that this was AI generated and still want what we call human in the loop, so that there's some aspect to that. At least from what I've seen currently, going forward, we may or may not always see that. There's a product called Notebook LM by Google. It's one of the ones I send a lot of my students to. The thing I like about it is you can upload your documents and then ask questions about your documents, and it will cite exactly where it pulled from your documents. And the other thing I like about, there's a lot that will do that. The thing I like about Notebook LM is the fact that it will actually create a 6 to 12 minute podcast of two AI agents talking to each other about whatever topic. And so it will summarize it, and then you can just listen to it as you go. I tested my dissertation, which, as y'all saw the title, is not the most intriguing for most people. The podcast made it a little more enjoyable, at least. So yeah, you have those that can do that. If I just take that and post it, unless you've heard Notebook LM's AI agent, you might think they were human. Most people, whenever I've listened to it, kind of just a test, they'll say, it sounded a little off, but I couldn't tell if it was just the audio quality or if it was AI. And so you do have to be careful. I say that. One problem that they have seen is scam callers impersonating loved ones. And so because there's so much media out there, if your family members have stuff posted online and it is publicly available, they can grab that. I say they, being unethical, immoral people who don't care about the law, can grab it, synthesize the voice, and then have it call you. And so one thing I would always caution people is if you ever get a call from a loved one and you're not sure, hang up on them and then call them back. So that way you can make sure you validate it. It's one of the simplest things to do, because if they're really a loved one and you accidentally hang up on it, for all they know, the call just got dropped, right? And so if you call them back and it's actually an emergency, they'll still be there and they'll answer, and then you can talk it through. If it's actually not them, it's a good red flag. Other questions? Yes?
So earlier on in your presentation, you put a data point up that said that 19% of people would be outsourced to AI. So my question to you is, we are sitting in a library which is filled with books and music and art. All of these poetry books, these novels, these art books, and how much of that 19% is going to be creative? Because I think all of us can agree we wouldn't mind chat GPT that's going to fight our insurance company or find a breast tumor or, argue with a politician for us. But how many of that 19% is going to be creatives who we are no longer hiring to create our art or write our poetry or make our books?
I don't know if I can give an exact percentage, but I would say it's going to be a section of that, along with what I'm seeing, at least in the areas that I touch, your graphic designer. This is the biggest one that's been impacted, right? Because if I'm doing web development and building something, often on the web design, I can write the HTML, I can make the web page stand up and give it structure. I can't make it look good. That's where that graphic designer typically comes in. Well, now if I can say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a color palette, give me the hex values, and create the images for me, and they're good enough, then I can go with that, right? And so I'm seeing it in the graphic design side. We saw a mass amount of, at least from my perspective, journal articles from the scholarly side actually having to limit and change how they accepted it, because you had even researchers out there just having mass creation of text. I forget what the stat is, but they're expecting by, I think it's 2026, over half the amount of the internet would be written by AI. And so because of all the things people are just creating with it. So I'm going to say it's a lot, but I don't know how much it's actually going to be on the employment side. I think you're still going to have those. It's just going to change what those skills might look like and how you handle it. I mean, if you think about it, there again, I still remember in college, photography class had the dark room, and you had to go in and actually still develop the film. Now photography class, I don't even know if there's a dark room on most of the campuses. They don't do that anymore, right? But the photography does handle that. Other questions, and I know I'm getting late, so.
So how do you suggest someone who's pretty much a newbie? I mean, you use the things that just pop up on your phone and you're talking to AI or whatever. But pretty much a person who's not too versed in that, how do you suggest they kind of start that immersion? Do you have apps they could download? What do you suggest?
It depends on what you're trying to do. And so there's so much to it. I can't just say, here's that one small entry point. Things that I would suggest, things like Google, the search engine, is starting to change. So if you're comfortable, Bing by Microsoft already has Copilot in it, and ChatGPT, basically ChatGPT in it. Those will give you a feel for some of this in that, at least in the search realm. If you're looking in more of the realm of audio, those kind of things, 7Cloud, I believe is the name of it, that handles a lot of that, and creating a voice. And so, honestly, just like I would tell any student, anybody, go to the library and research.
Good answer.
Right? It's one where that hasn't changed. How we do that has changed. But to find truth, you still have to go dig through all what you see and find what is true and what is not, and find ways to validate that. If you take anything at face value, you're going to be burned and have problems. And so learning to do that, to me, is just like with any other topic. Find the valid sources, the ones that are trustworthy, and stick with those and go from there. All righty. Thank y'all for your time. Y'all have a good day.